Well, hello, everybody. We are live recording today, and I'm looking over here at y'all to see if my audio is working. Looks like we're good. So today, for those of you new to my YouTube channel, I have an audio podcast called Living Free in Tennessee. And I used to just do audio, but now sometimes I record on video live and then produce the show from the audio recording from the video. And today I decided to do that because today's episode is going to be all about a question I got on the MeWe chat for the Living Free in Tennessee community. And they wanted to know, like, how does this Holler neighborhood thing even work? So I thought, well, you know what? We got a lot of new listeners. So I think it'd be a good time to go into that. Plus, I just got back from being out of town. So the way this works is you will hear me reintroduce the podcast at the beginning. If I make a mistake, I edit in front of you. If you have questions, put them in the live chat in all caps, and I'll look over there. So when I'm looking this way and I'm not looking at y'all, that's really me looking at y'all because I have your chat up over there. So without further ado, we will jump into the recording of today's podcast episode. Well, welcome everyone to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you want to live on your terms. Today is Wednesday, February 24th, 2021. This is episode, wait for it, 400 of Living Free in Tennessee. We've made 400 episodes. Super excited about that. We are up to 2,000 listeners, which, you know, I have friends who are much bigger than that in size, but that's a big deal for me. That 1,000 listener benchmark was really hard to get to. And now we're up to 2,000 downloads per episode within about a week of them coming out. You know, it's really cool when I'm doing marketing stuff or looking at selling sponsorships, I get to say how many downloads per month. That's like the industry standard. I found that out. I was like, well, I just kind of look week to week because that's what I want to know. Anyway, today, by listener request, I'm going to explain how the Holler neighborhood works as a community, as well as cover some of the history of how we went from like random Nicole blathering on this microphone to my right and into what is now a pretty close-knit community of 4 households that live near each other. Plus, we have a wider close-knit community called the Tennessee GSD group. And you may have noticed that podcasts kind of stopped last week. Was I overwhelmed? Not really, but I didn't have power or really good internet. It's hard for me to upload episodes over my cell network because I have limited data by choice, by budgetary choice. And recording the podcast without power is hard, even though there are generators here. We did do episode 399 last week, basically over YouTube, or maybe it was 398. And you can see that there. I will be ripping the audio from that video recording and producing the podcast. So on your podcast players, you're going to see some stuff out of order, only because we had all that ice. And then I was barely able to get my butt into my car out of town to go to the FireOn launch party. And then I was driving for 14 hours down and driving for 14 hours back. You'll hear more about that a little bit later in the show. So there's a backlog of production going on. And I thought the most important thing is today's podcast. Also, there's a webinar coming up. So we're back to webinar schedules for all you members there. March 6th, which is a Saturday at 2 p.m. Central, I'm going to do a presentation on pantry management practices. This is done over Zoom, and we do it like a meeting. So the attendees get to ask questions as we go. I'm going to go over basically the best practices that I've developed here at the Haller Homestead, talk about how I plan what to buy, talk about how I'm able to just shop once a month, and how I've figured out what kind of buffer I need, as well as talk about storing things without the critters getting into it. Because if you store your pantry food and the critters get into it, you're super not happy. So that's March 6th, 2 p.m. Central. There is a save the day notice over at livingfreeintennessee.com. I will release how to register for it early next week, but I'm hoping I get to let you guys use the new registration tool by then. So like, need a few more days in the weekend. Plus, it's super nice outside. So I'm probably working out in the yard this afternoon. Also, Monday, June 14th is an in-person workshop here at the Living Free in Tennessee at the Haller Homestead, Living Free in Tennessee headquarters. And it'll start at 9 a.m. We're going to do chicken processing. Registrants get the class. They get the manual, which is updated from last year, which with pictures that we took so that you can see a little bit better in the manual. And it's going to be taught by Chef Brett, just like it was last time. And then you get to go home with a chicken that you processed. And we feed you lunch. And it will be keto friendly, but don't worry, my carb eating friends. We always have carb eating friends sorts of things. Finally, if you want to send feedback or have questions, you can do it. Just email me, Nicole at livingfreeintennessee.com, or go over to the website, livingfreeintennessee.com. Click on contact, fill out the form that comes to me. With that, it is time for the first segment of today's show. That's Tales from the Prepper Pantry. This is where we talk about storing what you eat and eating what you store. And as I mentioned, I was on the trip last week. So it was about 4 total days, I think, or 5. I don't know. I left Saturday, came back yesterday. So that's 4 days. And I have been being purposeful about not putting crap in my body. And the thing is, when you travel, it's harder to not put crap in your body. Although Love's truck stops have like fresh fruit and nuts and jerky and stuff like that. So you can get some basic like salads and those sorts of things, but it's still not as good as what I cook at home. And this is kind of an issue if, like me, your metabolism likes to balloon out bigger and bigger when you put crap in it. So going into the trip, with the help of the Holler neighbors, one of them came over and packed coffee orders, which needed to go out. And another one was doing a bunch of stuff around here to free me up to be able to pre-cook for my trip. And what I did is I cooked a bunch of bacon, I cubed up cheese, I hard-boiled eggs, and I cut up like celery sticks and carrot sticks. And then I always have cans of not sardines, but smoked oysters because I like them better than sardines and other things like that. And I was able to make it through the whole trip on what I brought. I was not disciplined enough to do that, but I was able to. The one thing I did is on the very last day, which was a 12-hour driving day, I bought a hamburger. I ate said hamburger. It made me feel really bad. So in order to feel better, I bought chocolate, and then I ate chocolate, and that made me feel even worse. But it kept me awake, and I got to my hotel, and then I ate some food that I had brought with me and back on the horse. But in former trips, I would have gone out to restaurants. And then once I get to a restaurant, I usually make a bad decision. So it was really great to do that. And it's what I did also when I traveled to Kansas to pick up my roaster. It's amazing how much more energy you have when you bring whole foods with you and are able to eat what you bring along and what your body's used to on a trip versus going to a lot of exotic restaurants to eat, which of course, when you're out having fun, you're going to want to do that. But if you're traveling for work a lot, it is really nice to be able to do that. And I was able to do that all out of the pantry, except for I needed to borrow bacon from the Tactical Redneck because I have bacon, but I don't have a meat slicer that will work with my bacon. And I didn't feel like taking my knife out and laboriously slicing the meat. I think I am going to reach out to Chef Brett and see if I can like just come visit with all my bacon and use his commercial slicer to get that all done. I believe he has one. So that might be in my future, because before the workshop, I need to do that so I can feed y'all the bacon we made here, which is part of the fun of coming to my workshop is we feed you the food we're growing here. I also did the early spring reorganization of canned goods, which I usually do a little bit later in the season. But this year I've just been doing more of that kind of maintenance, which I'll totally talk about in the webinar I'm doing. And it wasn't a big issue to do, just making sure all the empty jars are out of my way so I can see what's in there, making sure anything still left from 2019 is queued up to be eaten. And I have a big announcement to make to everybody who is a Holler neighbor. There's only one more jar of the infamous batch of 2019 green beans that were cut instead of stringed, which means we have tiny little strings, which you can't really eat, right? The last crappy batch of those is gone. I'm going to cook it this week. And since I'm not participating in Holler meals this week, y'all don't have to eat it. I'll be eating that this week. So got that all reorganized. And I also took a dive into the prepper pantry because I'm getting ready to build shelves in the prepper pantry that are more appropriate than the prefabricated shelves to store stuff that I store in the prepper pantry, guys, is an actual room. even though I store stuff in multiple places around the property. I also last year went really strict keto and had 5 boxes of potatoes from a local farmer. 5. One of those boxes is gone. Maybe I had 6. I don't know. One of those boxes is gone. The other one's dehydrated. I had 6. I had 4 left. They're starting to grow eyes. And so I put out on Facebook, hey, I got these potatoes growing eyes. Who wants them? They're locally grown. So they're great. They're really well acclimated to the area. Sold those overnight. $10 a box. The guy who came to pick them up turns out it's a neighbor on my road. So I got to meet a new neighbor who just built a house here. That was really cool. And then he's going to plant these potatoes, which are acclimated to our area. It's perfect. And then while I was doing the pantry reorg, I found a secret stash of canned stock, canned broth that I've made, or bone broth is what y'all call it. I call it stock. And it's just, I save bones and odds and ends of vegetables, and every so often make a big old batch of broth or stock, and then I can it if I can't use it all. And we've been going through, 2 to 3 jars of that a week between me and other neighbors using it. And I still have a ton of it. I have way more stock than I ever use, because half the time when I make the stew, it's with a piece of meat with the bone in it, which you can just add water to, and it makes its own like soup stock. So we haven't been using that up. And when Mama Sauce visited in December, I remember we needed to process all the bones so we had room in the freezer. And we made a bunch of stock, and the jars were canned and they were on my counter, and then they disappeared. Now I know where they disappeared to. So I found a full 12 jars, which I was able to work back into the rotation. So I'm glad I found those, because where she had them, I may not have noticed it for years. But I just happened to be going through every part of my kitchen as part of Nicole has too much crap and needs to reduce stuff. So I've been going through all the kitchen stuff and pulling stuff out that I want to keep, and pulling stuff out I don't want to keep, and putting them in 2 different places as I decide what goes where back in the kitchen. So that's the update from the prepper pantry. I didn't use the prepper pantry much because I was driving around and, waiting for a tow truck and a whole bunch of other stuff. With that, it's time for our next segment, Operation Independence. This is where I talk about building local ongoing revenue into my life, as well as just general financial stability. I went to FireOn. So Xavier Hawk, who I am co-host with on Unloose the Goose, and we are recording tonight at 7:30 live, also on YouTube on the Unloose the Goose channel. Xavier Hawk has had this idea since 2014 or 2015 about a way to link communities so that they can become their own bank, basically. And if you don't know it, when you pay with a credit card, right, you use a card, and it goes, the vendor says, I'll take $30 from you. Anywhere from 2.5% to 6% of that transaction goes to the bank processor. And that's kind of a bummer for the person taking the money, just because, we lose a little bit of profit for that, or we build it into the price, which is what I do at Holler Roast. And those fees just go to the bank to pay for what the bank does when they process money. Well, Xavier thought, well, what would happen if I kind of paired this idea of community with this idea of capturing as much value as we can, and we sort of become a community corporation, and then the transactions we do are with cryptocurrency, and the 3% or 2.5% transaction fee goes into a pool that the community can decide how to allocate it. And as he got deeper and deeper into this idea, he found a lot of other ways to strengthen connections among people, empower the individual to own their own life, and further freedom. And he calls this project FireOn, Phireon. So it's been a long, laborious task for him. And if you want to hear the episode about it, just type Xavier Hawk in the search bar at Living Free in Tennessee. I'll also throw a link in the show notes, and you can listen to him just talk about how FireOn works. Okay. Well, he finally got the app for FireOn. It's available on iPhone and Android. The iPhone app works a little bit less glitchy than the Android app, but you can now install the app. If you're looking for it on iPhone, just go to the App Store and type in FireOn. If you're looking for it in Android, type FireOn.com. and then install the app. And it's like a social networking app. They do not have the layer of cryptocurrency that does that other cool banking thing I told you about yet. But if you want to get in on that and get some of that, they're only going to announce the launch on the FireOn app. Plus, it's just a fun way to start getting to know some of the people in the FireOn community, because these are, I'm around a lot of homesteader freedom type people, and I'm around a lot of public policy type people who are freedom oriented. This is a more artistic crew, a lot more artistic and creative, and that's kind of fun. So he had a launch party in Florida, and I wanted to support my fellow goose. So I went down there to support him and check it out. Got to know some really cool people, and it's fulfilling a personal goal of mine this year to establish better balance in my life, but also as part of that, grow the network. And growing the network means getting out and talking to people and getting to know people. And then when they ask about what I do or whatever, eventually they figured out there's this whole really cool community they can join. And it helps all of us as we connect with more and more like-minded people with shared values. So it was a great trip. It was not such a great trip for my car, which is back in the shop. I was on my way down south on Saturday morning. It was 15 degrees when I left and icy. And then it took me forever to get down the Holler Road, by the way. And then the minute I hit the highway, nothing. Totally salted. So no problems. But I kind of kept feeling the car slip. So I made it to Chattanooga and parked my car at the airport, got a rental car, drove that to Florida and back, got my car. Somebody from the community hooked me up with his mechanic friend in Chattanooga, who looked at my car and ran the codes on it to see what was up. It's a knocking sensor is out and a valve was stuck open in my motor. And they're like, you're probably okay to make it up to Smithville, which is where my mechanic is. And so I started driving. I got just north of Spencer and the car just completely went boom, wouldn't start. It was really mad. It was kind of mad at me the whole time. I had figured out how to keep it from knocking as I was driving by modulating my speed. But it died, and I got to have a nice ride with a wonderful AAA driver to my mechanic who was on his lunch break, so they close at lunch. He comes out, he's like, I can't believe you're back with that car. I'm like, whatever, here it is. I was going to drop it off Thursday, but it stopped running, so you get it now. And he just kind of, he's always so supportive of me, but he always looks like he feels bad for me when my car breaks. But I do know that I bought a car with 200,000 miles on it that I did not own. So I've always known there was going to be a lot of maintenance. Hopefully this one's not super bad. In the meantime, because of my buddy Kurt giving me the car that used to belong to my stepdad, I'm driving a 1986 Mighty Max pickup truck. Woo! And it's got all sorts of libertarian bumper stickers plastered on the back of it that he put on as he owned the car. So it's pretty fun. So that was the FireOn update. All said, the contacts I made were great. It was wonderful to see the community. I haven't ever met Xavier in person, so I got to meet him in person. Didn't really get to chat much because he had this big event going on, but it was great. And I think it's just a reminder to get out and do stuff like that, guys. Go out and do stuff. The other thing we're doing is function stacking the need for more event space with the need for me to have a carport. And our buddy Ken is coming out tomorrow with a worker, I believe, and starting the construction of the great Haller Homestead carport, which will serve a couple of purposes. One, it's another covered area under which we can put like those outdoor propane heater things for people. I can hang walls on it in the form of vinyl. So it's a little bit more space in addition to the event tents for us to hang out. But what I'm excited about is it's going to shade the prepper pantry a little bit on the part of it that because it's half clear roof, half not clear roof. It's going to shade the prepper pantry, which means a little less sun beating on the prepper pantry in the mornings from the east. And I'm going to finally have somewhere not rained on for my garden tools, which they're always in the way. They're always shoved somewhere under cover, and I'm making dedicated space for that. That's going to be a big deal for me because one of the things that I lose money on here is not properly storing my garden tools and then having to buy replacement garden tools. So that's all for Operation Independence today. It is time for the main topic of today's show, and that's how the Holler neighborhood works. I think a lot of people get attracted to these stories because they hear about all this cool community and they look around them and wish they had the same thing. And you can. A lot of people ask me after they hear these stories, like, how do I build community? Because what they see is this great network and the close relationships I have with the the four of us, I guess the three people who live near me. And sometimes it's really hard for me to answer that because this didn't happen overnight. This happened over 5 years. And really, if I look back, it happened over the 14 years that I've been here. It was one step at a time, right? So since last year, this podcast has doubled in size. It's on track to double again this year. That extra reach is just a bunch of y'all hearing what's going on here and starting your own communities. And then eventually, one of us goes to the other one's event and we get to know each other. And then that makes the community bigger and tighter. And there are even more people involved. And then along the way, you make close friends with people. And guess what? Next thing you know, you got 3 neighbors. That's how simple it really is, but it takes time and effort. But as the podcast has grown, that means all y'all who are new haven't heard like the whole advent of how I went from this random chick recording a podcast by myself on her Holler to having the Holler neighbors as a more formal community with a strategic plan, right? So here's how it went down. I'll start with the history, and then I'm going to say some lessons I've learned, and I'll be curious if y'all hear what I've said and then think, I think this other lesson learned. And then I'm going to talk about how we currently organize ourselves, because I think part of that question is, how do you organize yourselves without somebody suing the pants off somebody else, or people mad all the time, or infighting, or resentment, right? That's an important piece. So way back in the day, I moved to the Holler, and at that time I had a partner in my life who has since departed. And when we moved out here, we thought we would never see another person as long as we lived. It was I'm way out in the middle of nowhere. If you come out here to any of my events, you'll be like, whoa, yeah, Nicole's right. This is really out in the middle of nowhere. And on day one, my neighbor, Pat, who we now call Island Mountain Pat, showed up in his truck and introduced himself. And he started, when we moved in, there was a duck here that we named Borax, who had been left behind by the previous owners. And there were a couple of cats. And I wasn't living here. This was supposed to be a weekend getaway, right? Well, Island Mountain Pat agreed to feed the animals because I have a soft heart for animals and I didn't want them to starve. And so he immediately started kind of, flowing from his house, which is almost next door, to my house to make sure animals were fed. And every weekend when we came out to work on this, Pat would come over and help or hang out or invite us to his place, introduce us to people in the area. And I think, had Island Mountain Pat not been here, the trajectory of how this whole community grew would not have happened. Because at the time while I was friendly with neighbors, I wasn't one to do a lot of, I'm just going to go visit you sort of things. And he's a connector. I'm a connector too. But he is very purposeful about it. And through his model of that, I thought, this is how people can just support each other. And the idea was formed. And then we started talking about developing a writer's gulag where we brought people out here and they would stay in cabins and we'd have salon discussions around the fire at night and talk about freedom issues and that sort of thing. And that never quite got off the ground, but we had a couple of what we called, it was on Labor Day weekend. So laborious libertarian libation weekend. So people would come out and we would do kind of, we'd hang out, party, talk about freedom, that sort of thing. And then I started growing food that very first year. I'm going to get chickens. I'm going to grow vegetables, right? And then I had too much. So I started going to the farmer's market to sell my surplus. And I had all these really cool heirloom tomatoes. And I met other farmers who had heirloom tomatoes who were like, hey, where's this chick coming from that's got all this good produce, right? And so as that happened, I got to know people in the local area. This is before I even think of a podcast, right? I got to know people in the local area who were into permaculture, who were into succession planting, who used organic growing practices, who understood how the plants here work. which plants here work. And by that time, I think I'd been here 2 to 3 years before I'd ever met any of these people. It turns out, guys, I randomly moved to a part of Tennessee that is surrounded by communes of people, like actual communes, right? Where they are growing vegetables and have been since the 70s in ways that are regenerative to the earth. And they know through that experience, they know what grows well here, and they're perfectly happy to share their knowledge and their ideas with some random stranger. In fact, what I saw going on here was some very deeply faithful Christian people, which stereotypically in the narrative are not going to get along with homosexual people. And then I saw communities of people, queer communities, and next to each other. And you know what they were doing? Exchanging gardening tips and getting along perfectly fine. And I thought, well, that goes against the entire narrative of our country. And it started making me question what's up, right? And I got to, I have some of the closest friends now from the communities around me that I've had in my whole life. And the best part was I got to grow food, and I got to grow really good food. And so that went on. And at one point around 2008, I thought, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to just quit my job, do homesteading stuff, grow as much food as I can here, sell it, and write a blog about it. I'm going to do this blog. And then I was offered so much money to stay in the more corporate thing I was doing that I didn't do that. And I kind of started a blog, and I kind of kept homesteading, and I was trying to develop this sort of process whereby I plant things and the waste naturally goes to the animals and I don't have to manipulate it a lot. I was basically trying to invent permaculture because I didn't really realize permaculture existed. When you meet people in the permaculture world, they don't necessarily say permaculture. Look this up, right? They're like, oh, hey, they've learned permaculture is a word that people don't know what it means. And they'll be like, if you do like some row cover and some companion planting and don't till your beds and get nutrients in this way and blah, 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 and set up these systems, then you're going to be a lot happier and your life is easier. That's permaculture, right? They don't call it permaculture unless you say, oh, permaculture, and then they're perfectly happy to dive into that. And I think that's a really good way to spread permaculture, by the way, because when we get too stuck in jargon, we have troubles. So I made a mistake and didn't just go into starting a blog. And at the same time, I did start a blog, NicoleSauce.com. And it was kind of cooking stuff. It was kind of gardening stuff. It's kind of unfocused. And it turns out I don't really like writing blog posts every day. And it's not the right venue for me. I like to write. I'm a good writer. I'm not very good at making myself be disciplined at writing. Podcasting, as it turns out, as you know, has turned out to be the way I communicate. And it's funny because I write show notes every day that I do a podcast, right? But the blogging itself was an issue. So I just kept plugging away at corporate world, and I was becoming more and more unhappy. I was becoming more and more just discouraged by all the effort I was putting in to enact freedom-based policies in the United States using our system to fix the system. And I started developing physical problems. And then I found Jack Spirko at the Survival Podcast. And the reason I found him is I had maybe 50 or 60 pounds of tomatoes to can. And by this time, guys, my phone rings from people in the community asking me canning questions because they're learning how to can. I already know how to can. And I was already canning much of the food we eat here. In addition, we eat fresh food when it's fresh, but I was already on that whole cycle of pantry management. I didn't think it was weird. I just thought it's what you do if you live in the country and grow food. Other people think it's weird. And I found the Survival Podcast because Jack did an episode on 7 wild plants you should have growing in your yard. And I had been on a journey for a couple years of learning new wild edible plants or medicinal plants. I thought, that sounds good. The Cato Institute podcasts are way too short if you're canning tomatoes and your hands are all tomatoey. This one's like an hour long. Perfect. And I fired it up. I listened to it. I'm like, wow, this guy's really good. And gosh, I wonder if he knows he's a libertarian. He might even be an anarchist. That's so funny. I bet he doesn't know. Turns out he totally knew. And I listened to one episode and then another. And then I started talking with his community. And then I realized, and this is like my confession moment, my name is Nicole Sauce, and I'm a prepper. I didn't know I was a prepper. You know why? Because modern day prepping is simply logical management of your resources. And I had developed a logical way to manage my resources. And that involved getting food in abundance and storing it and then using it when, like normal people used to do before we got ready for the on-demand stuff. And I see on YouTube, hi, Love and Little Greenhouse and Ken, thanks for joining us. If you guys end up having questions on this, you can throw them in all caps there. Anyway, so I'm Nicole Sauce and I'm a prepper. And then I started going to events and meeting people in person, and I got on the Zello channel for the Survival Podcast. One of the reasons that Living Free in Tennessee does not have a Zello channel, technically there is one, is that there's a perfectly functional The Survival Podcast Zello channel where people talk about basically the same kinds of things we have. At some point, some listeners started an LFTN channel, and nothing really happened over there. That's because there's a lot of crossover between my network and Jack's network, and you can just get on his channel, right? Which isn't really his. It's run by his listeners. But as I got to know people on Zello, I was like, wow, other people don't think it's weird to just manage your resources, which is what prepping is. I'm not prepping for the zombie apocalypse, but I sure as heck am going to make it through the winter without having to go to the grocery store if I can't. Luckily, I usually can, but it's much nicer when I can buy my chocolate. I'm much nicer when I can buy my chocolate. But I have learned if I store a bunch of chocolate, I'll eat my chocolate. So that's something I'll talk about in the webinar I'm doing on March 6th. Anyway, as I got into that, my job was becoming more and more and more of a clear emotional pull on me. And there was this moment where I realized that everything I've done for the last 10 or 12 years has done nothing to help human flourishing. And the best way I can do that is to A, be independent myself, B, show other people how to be independent. And I cried. I was like on my way to a trade show. I cried. And I had already launched my podcast as the only creative outlet I had. It was pretty much the only thing I was doing that I liked. I started a podcast because so many people were asking me about how to do canning and how to do homesteading things. I'm like, well, screw it. I'll start putting episodes out. It's good for me to have a creative outlet. I'm a creative person. If you're watching the video, you see the banjo behind me and the keyboard. I'm a musician, and I like to do things with my hands and build things and that sort of thing. And I like to think about new ideas. So I wasn't getting that at all in my corporate job. I was basically an administrator by the time I got to this point. And I had started this podcast and realized for my own health, I gotta go. And the good news was I had friends who cared about me because I had found that Zello channel, because I had the podcast and people reached out to me. And the cool thing was, one person in particular, David over at Cider Hollow Farm, had hosted an event here locally, and I had gotten to know people in person. And from the time of that transition to now, I changed from prioritizing work to prioritizing relationships in my life, because relationships are more important. And that meant making time for things that are sometimes hard to make time for. And one thing I did, there was this awesome total solar eclipse, and the Haller Homestead was ground zero over that. So we got some of the highest amount of time for the solar eclipse that everybody went wild over a few years ago. And I was like, you know what? Anybody who wants to camping, bring your own food. I'm cooking one meal. This is the meal I'm cooking. We'll figure everything out. But if you want to come here and see the eclipse, you can. And I had an Airbnb at the time, and some astrophysicists had rented it a year before the eclipse because they saw it coming and saw how perfectly suited my house was. They showed up with all their knowledge. Kurt, who you've heard on the podcast, showed up with his telescope with the sun filter on it. He surprised his wife by bringing her here because she listens to my podcast. And a bunch of people from the TSP Zello channel showed up, as well as some listeners I'd never met, one of whom is Brian Young, who's now an integral part of the Tennessee GSD crew. Another one was Nighthawk. I think I had already met Nighthawk once by that time at the Cider Hollow Pig Roast, but I hadn't really gotten to know him much. And here he was at that event. And guess what? It was really cool. I sat here and I was like, I could do events here. I'm glad I didn't charge for this event because it was like terribly hot, and we managed to keep everybody cool as possible. But I was like overwhelmed by people coming into my house, and oh my gosh, when we do events here, you do not come into my house anymore. But at the same time, they needed to have comfort, and so we started talking. I was like, "Hey, Nighthawk, like, what would you do to make it more bearable?" And we talked about where we would put event space at my house, and as a result of that, I set the foundation for our very first Living Free in Tennessee spring workshop, which was in 2017 or 18. I can't remember now. And then I went to Jack's workshop to see, well, how does he do it? And I learned some great things. Like, if you're going to do events at your space, first of all, throw a big party, as big as the event you want to throw, and don't charge money. And you'll learn all of the holes that if people were paying, they'd be mad at you. But since they're not paying, they're not mad at you, right? Go to other workshops that are run well and observe what's going on there. Don't be afraid to ask questions. If you come to my workshop because you want to do a workshop, it's okay to ask questions. I want you to have a successful workshop. I don't see it as competition. Other people doing workshops usually don't either. Well, from the moment I decided to do a workshop, Sean Mills from Hack My Solar stopped by, and we were already friends from Jack's. And he said, we're going to make this badass. What can I do to help? And we had a series of weekends getting my property ready for this event where everybody's came here. I fed them, and we built an outdoor shower. We did all sorts of stuff. And the cool thing is that's where the Tennessee GSD crew came from. So we had that first workshop, aquaponics went in, and starting from there on out, there started being rotations of different projects. And those projects are what really brought the tight-knit community we have in Tennessee much closer together. Some drink was drunk, some karaoke was sung, some work was done, right? People have gone through ups and downs. And then things started coming up for rent around me, and people would hear about it from the community and they'd move here. And we kind of had fits and starts on that. But, Nighthawk ended up staying here. I'm not sure he'll be here forever, but he's here right now. And I bet if some land went up for sale that he could own, he'd be stoked to buy it. But I also know he doesn't like seeing his money go out to rent every month, right? And we just started getting to know each other better and better. And there were deaths, and there were joyous things, and there were hard times, and there were relationship breakups. And we supported each other through that. And that's how we end up today with my house being the center. And then my rental cabin on my property is rented to Tactical Redneck, who, like Nighthawk, would like to buy property and build his own thing. Nighthawk is renting. Someday that person will sell to me or to somebody else, and that'll be great. And then Base Camp, which Tactical and I bought together as an investment property where Jenny lives. And I'm sure she also, if something went for sale, would love to get it. And what is great about having the neighbors is we knew each other well before we ended up here. It was by hanging out with each other that people decided they wanted to be here, right? And then, trying it out and seeing if they really wanted to be here. And the other thing that's cool is we are unified by shared values. So here's some lessons I learned going from just random podcast lady to having these neighbors who, when we were getting ready for the ice storm, it was really cool because we could all sit and say, this is a list of 12 things that need to be done. This is how we can divide up that list based on who's able to most do the work and who is available and who is good at what. And we got it all done for 4 households. And when the power went out and the heat went down, we checked on each other, made sure everybody was okay. We were prepared to bring, because base camp needs a wood stove, we were prepared to bring Jenny and her boys down to my house for warmth if that was needed. That kind of community support, guys, should never have gone away, and it's gone away. And the way you get that back is you make it come back. You don't have to be good friends with your neighbors to have that kind of support, right? Like, I have a couple neighbors that relationships are a little tense down the road. I don't hate them. We just disagree on some things. But when power went out, guess who I was reaching out to make sure they were warm, had enough food, and if we needed to cool down their fridge, we could. Reached out to them. There's no reason not to. The first step and the person you can control in setting up that kind of community is be the generous neighbor. Be the one who reaches out, right? If you take that step, some people will say no. Some people will think you're weird. None of that matters. Just be that neighbor. Be the neighbor who cares. I just actually met a new neighbor from down the road with those potatoes, and I didn't realize they were living there, or we would have reached out to them too to make sure they were okay. And I said, how were you in the storm? He said cold, but they ended up going to stay with his son where there was power. So, that's cool. But as you develop the shared values relationships, keep your eye out for what's for rent or for sale near you, because over time that can naturally develop into something really cool. I have a comment from YouTube. I'll read from Waylina. Knowing people who already live somewhere seems to be the way of it now. So many places get listed are already contingent or pending as they show up on listings. Yep, that's right. And that's partially because somebody sees, when I see a place for sale on my road, I want a non-asshole on my road, right? So I'm going to tell all my non-asshole friends, hey, there's a place for sale. That's just it's the way it's going to work. And, it doesn't always happen that that's what happens, but that is another thing, is be proactive. So lessons I learned about community and about developing what we have here now is you get out what you put in. Don't, however, approach the network like, what can I get out of this network? Approach it like, what can I put in? How can I be the generous neighbor? How can I be supportive? And over time, that support does come back because you develop the trust. Hardship develops trust. Hardship develops trust. Hardship can simply be building a composting outhouse and having to troubleshoot when you didn't make the bench wide enough, how to adjust the seat so people can still use it. By the way, we should fix that this year. Anyway, that's not a big hardship. Or it can be somebody has lost their grandma and needs some emotional support. Or it can be somebody lost a job and needs your support for bills, right? Hardship really, really helps strengthen that trust. The other thing I learned is make time to go be with people in person. I don't care how many COVID shutdowns there are, the in-person connections we make are what set the foundation for strong relationships. That's why that Freedom Cell event in January that I did not have time to do happened. That's why I just spent 4 days on the road going down to FireOn to support Xavier, right? That's why we do events here. But don't just do events where you are. Go other places. That's why I'm probably going to try to invite myself to Sean and Dawn's house this year so I can go, because I haven't been able to hang out with them much since they moved to Alabama. Well, I guess I need to go see them in Alabama, right? They've been good about stopping by. I have not been good about visiting them. You can change you. It's important that you get out. So make time to go be with people in person. Let the community guide itself. This one's hard. So a lot of people want to structure their community and their instinct is to tell the community what to do. But the thing is, when you set a community with expectations that solutions and positive action is what you're about and not bitch fests, the community will guide itself. All you need to do is set that foundation. And if you start trying to push the community into things, you start getting a top-down, unhealthy, bureaucratic problem. It doesn't work in government. it does not work in communities. Or if it does, it's not a healthy community. So let the community guide itself, let them set up things and just empower it, right? And when somebody has a really good idea from the community, be like, yeah, I'll help you with that. That is one of the best things about our community that's happened, is that it's naturally organized itself into different kinds of talents, people having different roles, projects that I would have never thought of happening, different communication techniques, right? It's all come from itself. I haven't told it what to do. And I think that's really important. And if you're a freedom-loving individual who believes in personal liberty, it's really important. I don't know why, but libertarians are some of the most bureaucratic people, the intellectuals I've ever met in my life. They talk about how you got to let this bottom-up thing happen, but then you have them organize something contractually, and you're like, holy cow, I'm not participating in that, because you have too many damn rules. If you try to solve for every problem in the rules before you get started, you spend more time writing the rules than living the life. I'm going to live the life, right? And then just know it's going to go where it goes. You may end up with four really cool neighbors like I have, or you may end up with 20 people within a 10-mile radius or 20-mile radius who are really supportive of each other. It doesn't matter. It's going to go where it goes. You may end up all alone in Canada talking to a bunch of people on MeWe who are like-minded as you try to troubleshoot your life, right? Doesn't matter. You got your community. Doesn't matter how it works. Eventually it works. Just remember, for the local support, you get out what you put in, and you need to be the neighbor who reaches out and helps. And if you do that consistently, people who are even not inclined to do that often will do it. And if you have that one asshole, I mean, you know who the asshole is. Don't be an asshole when they really need help, though, because sometimes people, just need help. So the way the Holler neighbors work now, and I think when this question was asked, it was less about history and lessons learned and more about, like, how in the world do four of you with four different tastes in music and four different tastes in reading and four different interests intellectually and whatever, how do you guys get along without having a lot of animosity and piss-offedness? Because that happens in communities, right? People hold grudges. Well, first thing is, we don't hold grudges. Right? If you don't hold grudges, and everybody doesn't hold grudges, it's a lot easier to get along. I think some things that help with that are that we each have our own house. And we each have our own land, except for Tactical. But he's carved out a piece of my land that I pretty much let him do what he wants. He checks with me on big things. And eventually he'll have his own land. But we each have our own place to be by ourselves, to regenerate, to put our efforts in that we want to, right? And we are kings of our homes. I don't get to go to Jenny's house and tell her she's not allowed to have bacon because I've decided that killing pigs is bad. She can have as much bacon at her house as she wants. If I don't want to serve bacon at my house, I don't have to serve bacon at my house. That's just how it works. We do have regular meetings, and our aim is monthly. Sometimes we talk bi-weekly, but we will have what we call family meetings, and we talk about what we want to accomplish, anything we need to address maybe. When we do a formal one, I'll ask for things in advance, or Jenny will, and then people can bring stuff up if there are grievances. It's better not to save your grievance, but sometimes you don't know until you know, right? And we talk about what we want to accomplish, and we talk about our progress. We talk about needs. We talk about schedule. It's actually time to have one of these right now. And that really helps, because if people know I'm out of town for a week for Jack's workshop and I'm going to need help covering my animals, we can talk about, are we covering animals from the four of us? Am I hiring somebody in? How's that going to work? Or if there's a big project like a carport, do I need to outsource that to Ken, or to Tactical and Nighthawk want to take that on? We can have those kind of honest discussions. Sometimes, though, I have learned that I need to ask several times what people really want to do, because I'm a strong personality and people don't like to say no to me. And I think for a community to work, you have to encourage people to say no to you. And sometimes when you notice somebody's always saying yes to you, you need to find out if it's really a yes, because I think when you have strong personalities, you can kind of accidentally bowl over people, and I'm one of those people who accidentally bowls over people. We are unified by shared values. We basically all believe in individual freedom. We have similar priorities about quality of food we want to have, living off the land as much as possible, being self-sustained as possible. And we have a foundational desire to help all of the neighbors reach their happiness, whether it be Jenny being a massage therapist or acupuncturist or spiritual leader or whatever she ends up doing, whether it be Nighthawk starting his handyman business, or maybe he'll decide that he wants to go into the lumber business. Who knows? We all have different wants and desires, and we want to help each other do that. And we don't want to tell each other what they should do with their lives. There's a big difference there. The big thing is, how do we deal with frustration and boundaries? So the first thing is boundaries. Jenny just gave me a book, I think, called Boundaries. I'm going to be reading it. I am not the best with establishing boundaries. I've been working on that as you've listened to the podcast throughout the advent of the podcast, because I realize that I give so much of myself that I forget to take care of myself. So boundaries are important. Everybody who's moved here, I've said, here's the deal. If you want to be my neighbor, you got to understand one thing. There are going to be days where you kind of, because it's okay to drop by my house if you're my neighbor. You might drop by and I might be like, today I need to be alone. No offense. Bye. And as long as that does not offend you, or if you ask to come over and I say no, as long as that does not offend you, we can get along. When I say no, it doesn't mean I don't like you. It means I really need time alone. Yesterday, after all of that trip and the car trouble and realizing I'm going to be facing an unknown car bill again, which will be fine. I've planned for that, but it's just a little stressful. I said, I'm not cooking dinner Thursday night because we have shared meals, right? And that's just like, heads up, everybody, figure out Thursday night. I'm giving you plenty of warning. And 2, I need to be alone tonight. And last night I turned up the music, listened to bad 80s and 90s music at top volume, singing at the top of my lungs to it. Oh, yes, you're unbelievable. And I was just getting back into this project that I'm halfway through of pulling everything out of all my cabinets, making a pile of don't want, making a pile of want, cleaning as I go. I just hit it for 3.5 hours last night. Didn't look at my phone, nothing. Just getting as much done as I could, getting myself unpacked, getting ready for today. And nobody was pissed off. And usually we would have had dinner at Jenny's on Tuesday night. And everybody else did. And I'm sure they had a really great time. I heard the food was wonderful. I missed asparagus. I like asparagus. I'm a little sad about that. But I needed that time. And I'm going to need that time the rest of this week after being gone for 4 days. And paired with the ice storm and the fact that my monsoon Malabar beans have been delivered and I need to roast all of these back orders that I could not roast because I did not have the beans. So along with that goes with dealing with frustrations. Things happen among the neighbors where we get frustrated with each other. The source can be that we didn't communicate well enough what the expectation was, and then the expectation was not met. It can be that we did not communicate what we needed, and then we didn't get what we needed. Like, it's kind of the same stuff that happens to humans all the time, right? And when frustrations come up, what has happened here, and we didn't set some great rule about this, what happens here is we have different personalities that approach things differently. Some of us, when we're frustrated, say, you know what? I was frustrated. Jenny's really good at this. She'll be like, she finds a way to be nice about, you haven't finished that thing you told me you're going to finish for me. And it's time to finish that thing. And then, people just figure that out. Others of us are less likely to express their frustrations, and we've learned to ask more questions. Are you frustrated with us? Are you frustrated with something else? Is there anything we can do to help? And eventually it comes out. But it's a combination of observing people's demeanor, right? And it's also being responsible for expressing what you need. And, that's not always easy. And sometimes we don't know what it is. Like, I've had many conversations where, well, I don't know what I need. I'm frustrated. I don't know exactly why I'm frustrated. I need to think about it. And then a couple days later, okay, this is what I'm frustrated about. Do you have time to talk about this? Those sorts of things. Those conversations happen here, just like they probably do in every functioning family in the world, right? Communication and connection is a big deal. So we used to use the Zello app on the phone to communicate, and 3 of us do. So Nighthawk, Tactical, and I talk on Zello. Right now, my actual phone with Zello is in the other room, so I don't talk on Zello while I'm on this podcast. But it does not work on Jenny's phone. So then we also have a Telegram group that's only for the Holler neighbors. And when dinner's ready, I will say on Zello, dinner's ready. And then I will go on Telegram and say dinner's ready. Or we've also used the Cozy app, which allows you to do shared grocery lists and a calendar. We're not very disciplined about using that, but when we do use it, it works really well. I'm about to do a big old grocery shop this week because it's time for my monthly restock. And today I'm asking everybody if you need me to pick something up at Sam's Club or order something from the places I order from, need to know what that is, right? Because it's the monthly buy for me. That's really helpful. The communication and then making time to connect, to just like hang out and eat together is really key. So we've gone from 4 days we're eating together to 2 now because of Jenny's schedule. And I missed one this week and I'm missing another one this week. But, when we actually get together and sit down and eat and all talk at the same time without the agenda of some big family meeting, that's super helpful because we have that connection over time. We hear about what's going on in everybody's lives. And I do like that aspect of what the Holler neighbors are doing. And then as we've moved through our strategic plan, we started developing a strategic plan because I thought, well, we've got these neighborhoods. They've always been helping me with stuff I do for the podcast, but what if they could get value out of it too, right? And so we've moved towards efforts that we worked communally on, centering around events we do here and producing high quality food. That's in our strategic plan. Our strategic plan is not 100% done yet. I have to push through the next wave with everybody, and I have not been in a place to do that. But we have very clear focus. So one of the projects, that chicken processing workshop, is not a me thing. It's a Holler neighbor thing. And we're all kind of putting money in, taking care of the birds, doing the event planning together, having Brett in to do the training and paying him. And hopefully at the end of that, we look at the financials of that and it makes sense for the Holler neighbors, right? The goal is we get out of that with some meat as our profit. And that's kind of cool because it's doing a couple things. We like sharing best practices. We want to be a place of healing, and we want to link people with high quality food. The more people who know how to process their own chickens, the more can do that, right? And then along that lines comes the money matters issue. So some of us have more money than others. And, I can put all the money in for the chicken thing. Not everybody here probably can. I don't know. I haven't asked. But if we're all putting effort in, then we need to start tracking who put the money in. Did they get their money back? How much time? Not to the minute, guys. We're not going to, no punch cards here. But if pretty much Tactical and Nighthawk raised the birds, then, they should get some credit for that. That's why I got excited about FireOn, because we can start doing internal exchanges without having to, invoice each other and that sort of thing. We'll see how that goes. The strategic plan, though, has been really helpful. And then we've been kicking around the idea of using Holler dollars, like actually creating a voucher system here where, like, Jenny came over Friday and packed coffee for me, and I'm paying her money for that. Well, if we had Holler dollars, I could pay her Holler dollars for that. And then if I take Holler dollars for chickens that I raised, that would be great. And then if she takes Holler dollars for massages, you see how that works? You start having this barter system set up. So that's something that's not real formal yet, but we'll be sharing that with you as we go. So that's how the neighbors work. So far, we have been successful as a community for, it's been growing, but for a few years. And that doesn't mean there hasn't been frustration. That doesn't mean there haven't been struggles within our ranks, within our own mental health. That doesn't mean we haven't faced and overcome and are still overcoming financial problems. And that doesn't mean there haven't been arguments or disagreements. It's a community. That happens in a community. The deal is that we've all agreed to come together, to open lines of communication, to discuss healthy boundaries as we need to put hurt feelings aside, to find solutions together as a family would do. If you approach your neighbors in that way, you'll find yourself a lot better off than if you're mad and hold grudges. Even if you're not a community like we are, right? If you're able to put hurt feelings aside and not get your ounce of flesh for whatever pain they caused you, you're going to be in a much, much better place. It really helps, I think, that everybody has their own home and their own castle, because I can't imagine how this would be if I had somebody telling me what color I could paint my house all the time, or whatever, like up in my face about stuff. It's not, it wouldn't be great. So the Holler neighbors really work because we have shared values and we love each other and we have goodwill towards each other. We know people are coming from the standpoint of good intentions, even if sometimes we flub the ball. I think the most important shared value we have, though, is that we buy into this concept of individual liberty and the non-aggression principle. And that gets real nerdy from there, right? This notion that as long as you're not harming somebody else, you can do what you want and it's none of my business. That goes a long way. And if you are harming somebody else, we'll bring it up. That also goes a long way. As a friend, I am going to tell you if I see you harming yourself and you're not harming me, right? But at the end of the day, if you're my friend, you can do what you want. I don't get to stop you. I can just say that doesn't look too good what you're doing there. It's not my job to stop you. That goes back to healthy boundaries. You do you. That's what works. And we don't have a bunch of rules here. The rules we have are live up to what you promised as best you can, or tell us when you can't. Sometimes all of us promise things we can't deliver on, right? Well, then you got to just fess up. You can't deliver on it. Having mutual respect and a supportive friendship really helps in this community. It's helpful that we just like hanging out with each other. So I think it's really been empowering to all of us in the community in many different ways. If this hasn't covered what you're interested in hearing about the Holler neighbors, send me your questions, Nicole at livingfreeintennessee.com, or do it through the contact form at livingfreeintennessee.com. That said, if you like the show and want to support my work here and the Holler neighbors, you can do it in a couple ways. One, get your coffee at hollerroast.com. And two, go over to Living Free in Tennessee and become a member. There are 2 levels right now, and you get access to webinars, one of which is coming up March 6th, Saturday, 2 p.m. Central, pantry management practices. With that, guys, go out, make it a great week. And that's the end of the podcast. YouTube guys, thanks for joining me. Hope you enjoyed this. I didn't see a lot of questions, but some fun comments there. Be the neighbor who cares. Yep, that's what we all got to do, right? Anyway, hope you have a great day.